Well, hi YouTubers, hi, I'm back with 60 books in isolation, and can I just say right at the beginning, this is a bit of a trigger warning. It deals with a very sensitive subject. It deals with the events of 9/11 and a woman who wasn't there. Now, this has been covered in the media. Her name is Tania Head. That's what I'm going to be referring to her during this book review, and is the book that came out. There's been a fantastic documentary that came out as well, which I do recommend, and with the 20th anniversary of 9/11 fast approaching, it'll probably be retelevised. Okay, let me just talk about the book. Actually, before I do, let me talk about 9/11 itself, because it's been 20 years, and so many things that they've been seeded into our memory. It was Tuesday, and I was working at the entertainer toy shop in Oxford. It was my summer job before I headed back to university, and it was probably about maybe at 3:30. I was finishing work about 5, and time difference, the first plane hit the tower at about 1:45, and the second one about 20 minutes after that. So my best mate Pete came in, his girlfriend, and he said to me the Twin Towers in New York has been bombed. That's what he told me at the time. Probably because I was in a toy shop. I was pausing the right thing to say. By the way, you know, 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center. So I didn't know. I didn't know for hours. This was obviously pre the internet, you know, pre-smartphones. On the actual videos itself, if you see the events of the day, you see only a few people holding up cameras, and the ones that have been collected were part of a cracking documentary I actually watched the other day. So this is quite a new kind of event. It wasn't instantaneous, people knowing. So about 2 hours later, finished my shift, headed home. I remember the bus being very, very quiet. And in looking back, normally, you know, it's rush hour, there's banter. No, it was a very kind of Jude thing on the bus. And heading home, walking through the door, I heard my mum call out to come to the living room, and I remember sitting down. It was BBC News, and it was just showing a shot of the Twin Towers. I remember turning to my mum saying, "Mum, is the tower shaking or the camera?" Because suddenly I was looking at the tower itself, and suddenly it was like it was vibrating. There was like a ripple running through it, and I genuinely thought it was the camera shaking, because I couldn't imagine 2 seconds later I would watch that fall. And then obviously then I saw the second tower crumble, and it's heartbreaking. It's been 20 years, but everyone knows where they were when they found out. And thanks to Peter, he's, you know, by the way, 20 years, he actually still is my best mate. So, and I respect him for not telling me at the time and let me find out later. And short after that, I actually called him, we had a chat, you know, because we need to talk about it. And 20 years. Now, I would love to know where you were when you heard. And if those of you in New York, I am so sorry, because I know from my experience I'm from London, West London. I know how it feels when your city is attacked. It feels emotionally like the rug is pulled out from under you and yours played out for the world to see. It's horrific. It feels like part of yourself has been pulled out too, because the cities that we grow up in, be they big or small, they are part of who we are. And to the survivors of the event, the survivors of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, I am so sorry what you went through. Please, please accept. It's been 20 years now, and it must be playing heavily on your mind, especially today, because I'll be uploading this on 9/11 itself. Okay, so this is a survivor story of a woman who wasn't there, and that's the most heartbreaking thing. So the book is absolutely incredible, and it's by Robin Gaby Fisher and Angelo J. Guglielmo Jr. Okay, let me read part of the blurb, and let's get going. Tania's Head astonishing act of her experience on September 11, 2001 was a tale of loss and recovery, of courage and sorrow, of horror and inspiration. It transformed her into one of the greatest victims and heroes of that tragic day. But there was something very wrong with Tania's story, a terrible secret that would break the hearts and challenge the faith of those she claimed to champion. That's the thing. It's interesting from a narrative point of view, because the book starts out from Tania's point of view. Now, this is not from Tania's point of view itself, but the fact is that due to the story that she constructed, that a narrative, she created this narrative and everyone kind of fell for it. And it's about her fiancé Dave. Now this book doesn't go into his background. He doesn't go into his full name. I actually do know it because it's quite easy to figure that out for myself, but out of respect for the family, it doesn't ever divulge his full name, so he'll just be known as Dave. Okay, right. Sometimes Tania thought her life was too good to be true. She had a privileged existence, born to a wealthy family from Barcelona, Spain, Europe's largest metropolis on the Mediterranean Sea. Growing up in the trendy De Alexandre district, the canvas so much of the early 20th century masterwork of Art Nouveau architect Antonio Gaudi, attending the best private schools money could buy. Hardly wait to show Dave her homeland. Family's residence was a short walk from the bustling Paso de Gracia, Spain's richest avenue, with million-dollar apartments and fussy storefronts, bear names like Chanel and Gucci and Cartier. The narrative: Tania is wealthy, Tania is privileged, Tania had all this opportunity, and it was never true. And even how she describes meeting Dave is something out of a meet cute movie. It's the construction of the narrative. Right. Tania often described a fateful meeting with Dave as being like a scene from a romantic comedy. There she stood drenched and windblown, with tousled hair and a scowl on her face, and staring back at her from inside the taxi was this handsome guy about her age, with celadon eyes and a radiant grin. As she glared at him, still trying to get a point across, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card. "My name is Dave," he seemed amused. "You can have the cab, but you have to promise to call me." It's a meet cute. Dave stole a cab outside the World Trade Center. That's how they met. So the World Trade Center itself is playing into her narrative of her relationship. They met outside the World Trade Center. They worked in the opposite towers of the World Trade Center. The WTC is playing a part in her construction. Okay? Right. And the fact is that when she describes Dave himself, okay, Dave comes across like a saint. Dave is this narrative as too good for this sinful earth. There you go. What really struck Tania about Dave was not so much his good looks or his broad range of interests and talents, but even the fact that he knew about Ledadia said Jordi, the annual celebration of the patron saint of Catalonia, which auditioned to give a rose and a book to a loved one. But that he volunteered in the soup kitchen on weekends and taught children to read for a local literary organisation. She always considered herself a social activist. Yeah. So the man who did exist but had no connection to her. And then this fantastic relationship where he proposed on the World Trade Center itself, the restaurant at the top. And then they didn't have a marriage per se. They were engaged to be married. But then they went to Hawaii and had a ceremony there because they were going to get married at the plaza, but Dave's mother was becoming a bit of a momzilla, I guess. So they had a little private ceremony just themselves in Hawaii with their closest friends and family before they did a legal bit at the plaza. See? Now the whole narrative of wealth and privilege at the plaza, the World Trade Center. Okay. And then we get to September the 11th. The chapters in this are very, very short, I will say this. At 8:45 AM, 1 hour 6 minutes after pushing back from the gate at Boston Logan International Airport, Air America Flight 11, a Boeing 767 carrying 81 passengers and 10,000 gallons of fuel, moving at 47 miles an hour, ploughed through the upper floors of the World Trade Center's North Tower. At the time, Tania was conducting a meeting at Merrill Lynch's conference room on the 96th floor of the South Tower. The meeting had just convened, and members of the team were grumbling about the end of summer and the finality of a merger they'd been working on for months. Meant that regrettably they would be soon going their separate ways. All at once the building shook, and the lights in the conference room flickered. People outside the closed door squealed. Tania didn't grasp what was happening at first, not until her colleague cried out that someone was about to jump from the North Tower. She looked towards the top of the burning skyscraper and saw a man teetering up the ledge outside the windows of the World Restaurant. It had only been a few months earlier that she and Dave were there on the 107th floor having that romantic dinner, went up to one knee and proposed. How could life have gone from this to this? And when Tania describes her injuries, she says that her arm was badly damaged to the point it was hanging off by a thread, that she was burnt, that she was rescued by a man wearing a red bandana, okay? And this bit here, okay? Trudging forward, her attention was drawn to a sudden slight movement in a sea of stillness. She could barely make out the form of a man in a murkiness, a man camouflaged by a knot of grisly bodies and his own terrible bands. "Wait," Tania said, kneeling beside him, gasping for breath. The dying man reached for her. "Please give this to my wife," he said, dropping something hot in her hand. The gold wedding band in her palm was inscribed with a woman's name and the word "forever." Tania wiped away her tears and stared into the man's eyes. "I'll find her and give it to her," she promised, placing the ring in her pocket. But the man has already gone. And then, obviously, the aftermath of the World Trade Center. Sadly, the debris, ground zero, and a permanent scar in New York. And once again, to those who were there on that terrible day, I am terribly, terribly sorry. The narrative that Tanya's constructed is that she was there, this is her experiences, and they're all fake. But at the same time, it's also very difficult to read as well, because it's fake, but it reflects the true stories of people who were there on that day. There was a man with a red bandana. There was people who passed in mementos to loved ones, thinking that they weren't going to get out. You know, please give this to my wife if you see them. Give them to this. That's based on truth, and that makes it really difficult to read. Knowing that essentially she ripped off other survivors. For those who did survive, she ripped off their history. She ripped off the worst experience of their entire lives and kind of convoluted it into her own narrative, and that makes it so hard to read. But anyway, once again with Tanya's narrative, okay, because she couldn't stay in a place where her and Dave was meant to build a life together. Right. This bit here. Could it be a new life after such an inimitable sorrow? She wasn't sure. And maybe it was off trying to find out. A few days later, she was ready to make a move. She had to open her laptop and Googled 3 words: 9/11 survivor help. Right. Now, the sad thing is about the survivors, and for those who survived that day, you will know this from your own experience. You were kind of lost in the debris, if you will. The mentality was, for the survivors, well, you survived. That was how they made to feel in the media. And for those who lost their tragic lives, they were martyrs. That was actually a direct quote in a documentary I actually read about, so you watched about Tania Head. That's a direct quote from that. So, there you go. Right. This is a survivor emerges. Her words were so vague and restrained, like so many other survivors who had just begun to confess publicly their marks of silent suffering, the reasons for their ambiguity about reverence for the dead and the guilt over being alive. They were just beginning to feel angry over being overlooked, the forgotten victims of the worst tragedy ever to embody American soil. So they reached out to one another in the anonymous world of the internet. No one else, or even their family, seemed to understand their hard feelings and lingering despair. They were the lucky ones. After all, they had survived. I'm so sorry that they made to feel like that. Just made to feel that because they survived, that's enough, and it's not. They were going through anxiety, PTSD, survivor's guilt, and there wasn't enough help support available for them. And I'm so glad that now they are speaking out about their experiences. They're telling their stories because they're important to be heard. And once again, I'm still very, very sorry. And this focuses also on Manuel Shea, okay, who was a survivor, right? And just an example of what it was that Manny went through, okay? He'd been outside the North Tower for only 5 minutes when the neighbourhood tower roared and came crashing down. Manny ran until his legs wouldn't came any further, never looking back, finally making it home to Brooklyn in the late afternoon. The next day he went back to work at a sister branch of his company on Long Island. Something had ever happened. but he hadn't been able to get away from the regret he felt for not doing more to help his co-workers. I'm sorry, by the way, Manny. But the next day, Wednesday, after walking out of the World Trade Center, he goes back to work, as an example. Right. So, with that guilt also breeds resentment as well. It kind of feels, they feel internal anger that they are overlooked, that they can't discuss their feelings. And this bit here really comes, really summarizes it. It's by Brendan Chelius, who was one of the founding members of the group. Okay, we continue to be tortured by that day, yet it seems that nobody, even the people who are supposed to help us, understand what we are going through. We've all been through something horrible. We are seeing things that people going to work on a beautiful day in September aren't supposed to see. Most of us, at least one time that morning, were convinced we were just looking at our last seconds of life. We watched thousands of people die, just like us die, not on TV but with our own eyes. We knew it's a matter of chance that it was them and not us. And when others got on with their lives, we were suffering obscurity with that day. We lived with the flashbacks, the depression, the anxiety, especially the survivor's guilt. So many thousands of people experience that. It's heartbreaking. And the thing is, though, is this: with this 9/11 survivors group coming together, there is a hierarchy beginning to develop on, it's like what floor you were on, where you were in the building, as well. The hierarchy of what kind of ticks the box, if you will. Right. An inherent tension existed between the survivors and the families of the men and women who lost their lives in 9/11. Family members were placed at the top of the hierarchy of grief, and some questioned the veracity of the survivors' distress, and even their right to grieve what happened to them. After all, they were alive. They were the chosen ones. The survivors, on the other hand, were growing bitter about their being misunderstood and overlooked. Because the Survivors Forum was part of the World Trade Center United Families Group, an organisation that before fostered families, attributed by family members. The survivors who used it didn't feel comfortable with opening up about their suffering, but a strain cracked in September that year on the second anniversary detail, where some of them were turned away from Ground Zero ceremonies. So it's not just themselves, it's kind of like the public is saying. So the World Trade Center has been open for family members of those who lost their loved ones, but the survivors of the attack were denied entry, which is wrong, by the way. And I'm very sorry for, I'm also very sorry to the family members who lost their loved ones that they too. But the division coming in, okay, of feeling overlooked is very palpable in this book. So yeah, so that's the tragedy, is the fact is, okay, that on this forum these people will open up about experiences, how they felt about seeing their colleagues die, people they've probably known for years, people they've walked past, people just said hello to, people who they've got a coffee together, who didn't make it out. And the fact is that it comes also to a man called Jerry Borges, and if I mispronounced that I do apologise, okay? Right. And here's what he went through. And he went through it twice. Jerry Borges lived through the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, and it was on the 82nd floor of the North Tower on September 11th, when American Airlines Flight 11 stamped into the building. A privately guarded man, Borges shared the dramatic details of what he went through that day with only his wife and daughter. But he opened up about his. Now he kind of plays a strong part in this, his relationship with Tania Head. Now, because it was kind of, he was the one who started the survivor group. We are doing this online. Maybe we should meet up in person. Maybe we should be the ones to kind of come together and talk physically to each other, see each other face to face. And that is when, obviously, Tania Head, at this point, she's been going on the forum, telling her stories, telling about Dave, constructing her narrative. And in this bit here is when they all meet her face to face. All eyes were on her as she walked into the meeting at 520 8th Avenue in Manhattan on January 20th, 2004. None of them had ever seen her, but they all knew who she was. She was Rubenesque and not conventionally pretty, but her cheeks were apple red, her dark eyes sparkled when she smiled, and she was well turned out in a tailored moss-coloured pantsuit and Rolex watch. What struck them, what struck everyone had nothing to do with her appearance, though she had a presence. It was undeniable, even mesmerising, and a story, well, it had to be unbelievable if it hadn't been so beyond belief. Some of them didn't feel worthy to be in the same room with her, because on the narrative of the survivors, she ticked every single box. She was in the tower. She was engaged to be married. She was someone in the opposite tower. She was hurt herself. So, as cynical as that is, and that's also from a documentary which I actually saw on YouTube last week. So, and the sad thing is, though, about Tania Head is she had the ability to get stuff done. Now, obviously, this is a time which is pre-internet. You couldn't just go on and ask these kind of questions. There's a process. There's, the internet was still become probably mainstream in 2001. So this is a very, very difficult situation which people had no idea how to proceed, but she took charge. She's the one, who started organising events. She was the one who started communicating with all the right people. She seemed to have this gift to kind of know people, to get things done, which is one of the most saddest things of all. Is that the fact is that this woman, with her cloud of deception, helped lead these people from the shadows, if you will, and kind of help them get what they wanted, even if it was under false pretenses. That's the most saddest thing of all. Right. But the fact is, is that Tania also takes charge as well. As soon as she walks into the community support group, she takes control. She takes charge of all of it. Right. And the way the narrative is set out as well, it's making it clear, this bit here. Tania led the way into the urban wasteland, 16 ruinous acres into the hearts of the world's premier financial centre that had been tragically could be known as Ground Zero. This was her stage, and no one was about to begrudge her the lead role. Tania was stoic walking in. She'd been to this site more than a year earlier, she said, with one of the first family tours. This time she would experience it not as a bereft widow whose husband had died there, but as he would, as someone trying to cope with the battle scars of surviving. It hadn't been long since the last of the body parts were pulled from the site. Tania picked up a handful of dirt and let it slip through her fingers. Like so many of others who descended to the ramp to the floor, some survivors felt what they believed to be the presence of the people who lost their lives there. To some it felt like a warm breeze swirling up from the basin. Others sensed the air turned thick, as if with a oppressive kind of sadness, as they reached hollow ground. Tania described the same amount of comfort she experienced the moment in the South Tower where she felt Dave guiding her to safety. He was with her, she said. She could feel him. See what I mean? She's taken charge of everything. Okay? But the fact is that Tania's narrative and taking control is slowly kind of influencing the poor other survivors. It's kind of like, you suffered and you suffered. But I, Tania Head, suffered more than you did. And the fact is that she's so kind of, I think, convinced herself of the fact that she was there. And this bit here, this is when, on the forum, where they find out that someone is pretended to be a survivor. And this bit here, okay? And to kind of divert suspicion, she shuts them down and writes this. When I found out about this guy, I immediately wrote to the other moderators of the online group and asked them to ban him and to change our acceptance policy. I know you've told me you had some problems with fakes before, so yes, at some point, we're going to have to sit down and establish a policy to find survivors. I think the way things are now, there's some chance it will happen, but we need to be prepared. The thing about narcissists, and that is one thing that even at this juncture of Tania Head come together for the survivors of 9/11, is that narcissists need the victim. A narcissist is a vampire that needs a host to take control of. And sadly, her victim was Linda Gormley. Now, Linda was not in the World Trade Center on September 11th. She was outside the building. She watched it fall. And she questioned her place to be there. Let me just read this, okay? Right. Linda Gormley felt her heart hammering in her chest as he sat in the back of the crowded room. It was the first survivors' meeting. I had taken everything she had to get herself there. Linda was single and in her 30s, a pale-skinned blonde with signature bright red lips. She was pretty and personal and as fragile as glass, and would do anything for people to like her. She didn't know where she fit in the 9/11 community, if there was a place in a chain of suffering for people like her. Others had lost loved ones in the attack or had near-death experiences. Linda hadn't lost anyone. She was in the towers that day. By seeing things so awful from the sidewalk that for months afterwards she would drink until the images finally blurred into oblivion. Now she was sober and grappling with those crushing, impeccable memories. So, the woman who wasn't there essentially goes up to the woman who also wasn't there, but was struggling in the aftermath. As I said before, when you see an attack on your city, when you witness this firsthand, it does affect you. And Tania had found her victim. This woman runs the group, she said to herself. She's in charge and she has everyone spellbound. I know who I want to be friends with. I want to be in the centre of things too. But as Linda's attraction to Tania was more than just gaining status in the group. She was inspired by Tania's courage and resilience. After all she had suffered, she was able to put back the pieces of her life and was helping them to put back the pieces of theirs. Linda wanted that kind of character. She had been mired in artificial fog for so long that she didn't even know who the real Linda was anymore. I want to be like her, Linda told herself as she watched Tania relish the attention she was getting. This is a life I want to live. She wanted to be like Tania because Tania to the actual survivors. Tania to the survivors had lost so much, according to her own narrative, and yet was spending her time helping others who had legitimately gone through such pain. And they were captivated and spellbound by her, and in a way, she was gaslighting them. She was absolutely gaslighting them. She told this narrative so many times to make herself a victim after losing day, after being in the towers, after almost losing her arm. No one questioned it, because at the time you wouldn't question it. Why would anyone fake being in a tower? Well, hey. So, and it's interesting how when the events of the anniversaries come up, the impact on the others is also very, very heartbreaking. But it shows how Tania, no one suffers more than her. No one feels it more than she does. She went through more than what you did. So you should be grateful. And I'm Tania and I'm suffering. That's the thing. Right. This is Tania. She said some days she felt too depleted to leave her apartment. Other days she was unexplainably euphoric and felt like jumping out of her skin. She couldn't get relief no matter where she was. Being at Merrill Lynch offices in the World Financial Centre, overlooking Ground Zero, was a nightmare. She'd always waiting for a plane to hit the building. And where once she had loved to travel, now she felt panicky every time she boarded a plane for a business trip, for fear it'd be hijacked and crash. Right. She didn't want to burden anyone, Tania said, but it really felt as though she couldn't go on. I feel like I'm damaged and will never get fixed, she wrote to Williams. Richard Williams. He also survived Oklahoma City bombings. And I think I don't know how a bunch of pills are going to help me with my problems. But my therapist said to take off some of the emotional edge off so I can face my flashbacks and talk more about my experiences. Pills certainly wouldn't change the way the world continued to perceive the survivors, Tania complained. There was something she desperately wanted to effect. Why didn't people want to hear what she and the others had to say, she wondered. Testimony from the survivors of Nazi concentration camps was painfully graphic, as it should have been. Was it from 9/11, where scores of innocent Americans were murdered in the name of radical political ideology? Who are the people who bore witness to this Holocaust, expected to swallow their anguish and be as they were before? Right, and this bit here though. It seems as no one cares about how much I suffered, what I saw. No one cares about it as much as me. See? The narrative. Which, for a survivor, someone who was legitimately there, they are sitting there questioning their place in this. Now, I would never want to imagine, and for those who did, once again, apologies. But for someone to turn around to you and basically say, you suffered, but not as much as me. I'm more of a victim than you are. On the level of victimhood, I am top tier. For the individual themselves who was dead, that's heartbreaking, because it's essentially is, I haven't suffered as much as you. Is my suffering the same? And when it comes to Dave, because Dave, the mystical Dave, is always in the background of this. He's in the margins of this book. Okay? Right. And the excuses Tania finds to make sure that Dave's family and the other survivors, whenever the twain shall meet, here you go. Right. Dave's parents are private people who didn't fit into the very public 9/11 community. Tania told friends. They're better that they spend the anniversary away from the probe and eyes of the press. In fact, the only reason that she never revealed Dave's last name, except to the most innermost circle of survivor friends, was, and only if they asked, was to protect his family's wish for privacy. If she had a way, she was spending the day at ground zero with the other survivors, listening to the names be read from the roll of the dead. Yeah. And the fact is that, even though, obviously, this is the woman who wasn't there, the fact is that Tania is spending her time building this narrative of, I'm such a wonderful person. Now, when this tsunami hit, okay, in Thailand in 2005, okay, she claims that she was there, okay, she claims that she wasn't there for the tsunami game, but she flew over to help. She flew over to help rebuild communities and schools after the event. And no one questioned it, because you wouldn't. You'd just sit there and think, wow, Tania, good for you. You're doing something good. You're helping others. Okay? Right. And she's blogging about it. She's writing emails saying, okay, what she's doing. I personally think she now left her apartment, but that's just me. I have a very clear picture of what the tsunami must have been like and what survivors have endured, she wrote. It concerns me that why their physical wounds are being treated, the psychological ones are not. Having lived with PTSD for 3.5 years, I recognise a lot of it. Guilt for surviving why the others died, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, a blank stare. I wish more mental health professionals responded to a tragedy like this the same way rescue crews do. Okay. See what I mean? She's now going into, claiming to go into another community and claims to help out there, become the saviour of the tsunami, if you will. Because also for the survivors who are still struggling at this point with anxiety and depression, the fact is that this woman only 3.5 years later can face her fears and face a tsunami. For them, it's kind of like, why can't I be like her? Why am I struggling like this? See? It's the narrative of, if I can get over it, so can you, because I'm Tania Head and I'm amazing. Look at me, how wonderful I am. Right. And the fact is that she totally overtakes Jerry Bergrazi's peer support group. She totally takes control. And narcissistic tendencies are really, really coming through to the in, okay? Right. Let's be here. Right. In the first few months with the network, she built the group a website which she managed, and that she organised a survivor speakers bureau, facilitated a writer's workshop, met with publishers about producing a book of survivor stories, tossed the idea around for survivors documentary. In addition, Tania hosted fundraisers at her Tony Midtown apartment to keep the network running, and she always contributed the food, the wine, and the use of the beautiful glassed-in party room at the roof of her building. Right. Aversion to the group only intensified after her return from Thailand. After that, there wasn't a day that passed but Tania didn't propose some new initiative, some new way to ensure the network's relevance. Her fingers are taking over other people's work, they're taking control the support group. She's basically turning the support group for the survivors, which she was never part of, into mine. Okay? It's all mine now. Which does show narcissistic traits. Now, this woman is clearly going through a mental health crisis between fantasy and reality. Maybe she has a psychotic break. Maybe she just believed her narrative. But the people she described are victims of 9/11 and were also her victims of her actions, even though what she did was not illegal. Right. And the fact is that everyone believed her story so much that they never questioned it, not till further along. They never, because you couldn't. Because it sounded just, I guess not too good to be true, but it just sounded so real. When Tanya described it as it started the book, it does sound real. Very kind of something out of a movie, but also very real. Alright, let's be here. This is when choosing the tour guides for the visitor centre, which is still open for the day today, and the Cunners had to be outgoing and personable and have solid public speaking skills and memorable story that they were willing to share. Tania Head need vetting. By then she was the emblem of 9/11 survivors. Her story and upbeat personality took her to the top of the list, and the visitor centre staff felt privileged to have the celebrity survivor on its docket team. And that is where she met the governors and met Giuliani. There you go. At the end of the day, they were escorted outside to conduct practice tours along the perimeter of Ground Zero. The exercise brought different feelings for each of them. Linda had to fight off her unresolved fears of legitimacy because neither lost a loved one nor been inside the tower. But Gez struggled with feeling that the tours were part of his penance for surviving, as well as how much of his personal story he was comfortable sharing with strangers. But Tanya, a natural. He sat through the practice tour as if she performed it 1,000 times. Even her stories were not like hers, and a ton of it was so detailed and evocative that the others were all captivated. My name is Tanya. I lost my fiancé in the North Tower, she began. I'm going to tell you about that. See what I mean? Alright. And once again, Linda comes into this as well. Linda, who is Tanya's victim of her narcissistic fall, if you will. Right. Because they become fast friends, because I think Linda wanted to feel legitimised, if you will, because she wasn't in the tower, she wasn't there. And Tanya gave that to her. Tanya probably gave her words of comfort. You have much of a right to be here as us, okay? You weren't there, but you are still here, okay? Well, I had less feel like you, Tanya, but anyway. Right. Here we go. Well, Linda was with Tanya. She felt invincible. She was certain that they could walk together down Broadway, and if she jumped in front of a speeding cab, she'd be spared. The explanation was that Tanya's miraculous survival of 9/11 was actually protected by a higher power. Sometimes Linda would touch a friend's hand and think, God touched this, God or a guardian angel, whatever it was. Tanya was in divine hands. As long as she was with Tanya, Linda was covered. Nothing bad was going to happen. Right. Yeah. And then another woman comes in, okay? Janice. Now, Janice Calento, who became Tanya's New York mum, was a therapist, okay? And the fact is that Tanya was so good with her narcissistic lies that she convinced so many people of her, well, her truth. Not the truth, her truth. Right. And the fact is that Janice, being a therapist, who was there to actually help the survivors. Here we go. This bit here. Janice wasn't Tanya's therapist, but Tanya's needs came from everyone else in the network. Sometimes even for Janice's family. Every morning the therapist sent her text message to let her know that she was thinking of her or signing for New York mum. When Tanya wanted to have dinner, Janice took the train into the city from Long Island to share a meal. When Tanya phoned at 3 in the morning because she was having a bad night and couldn't sleep, Janice took her call and tried to calm her down. Well, one of her Genesis survivors' clients claimed about a dust-up she had with Tania. She took Tania's side. Right. Her devotion to Tania clouded professional objectivity in a way Tania could do no wrong. Even when she did question her behaviour, for instance, when Tania put mean fun at someone or repeated a harmful rumour, Janet excuses as a consequence of her trauma. Do you see what I mean about Tania Head? Tania Head's influence was so powerful, her manipulation so strong, that she fooled everyone. It wasn't just her survivors, okay? She fooled politicians. She fooled everyone. Now, the sad fact is that her time, her trauma, diverted the attention that the other actual survivors of 9/11 needed, okay, because all the attention was on Tania. In a way, Tania wouldn't let anyone else share the spotlight. She wouldn't let anyone kind of take back, if you will. Okay.